In this episode of Common SENSimilla, we'll be talking with a serial entrepreneur who cut his teeth in the early 2000s, taking a very similar path that this, particular entrepreneur also finds himself on. Building out early era digital marketing campaigns in a variety of verticals. My guest today is now the Vice President of Technology and Strategic Growth at one of Massachusetts' coolest dispensaries, Happy Valley. Gregg Weiss, welcome to Common SENSimilla. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to talk with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you, kind of like me, are a bit of a nomad. You are, Vice President at Happy Valley, a Massachusetts dispensary. You are not from Mass, but I'm curious.
Correct.
Now that you've had some time, you've been there for about 2 years now. I'm curious
almost.
if I can hit you with, if I can test your auditory skills now that you've been in Boston for a little while. Okay.
I'll try.
Which actor had the best Boston accent? Was it Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting, Blake Lively in The Town, or Nicholas Colasanto, Coach from Cheers? Correct answers only, please, Greg.
I'd say Coach from Cheers.
That's the right answer. We will be sending a comically large check in the mail. It's coming soon.
Okay.
And I also know that you spent some time in Jersey too, which I have Jersey roots as well. I married a Jersey girl, Bruce Springsteen.
I did too.
You had obligatory Springsteen at your wedding, like me, I'm sure.
No.
We like to stir up some controversy on this podcast too. So if you don't mind, I'd like to do that. We have to make content here, so this is very important. Which place has the best bagels in Cherry Hill? Is it Phil's or East Side Bagel?
I only lived in Cherry Hill for a year, and it was more than 22 years ago. But so I'm going to have to guess here and say East Side.
Incorrect. I'm sorry. We are not sending you that check. It's not coming. It's Phil's. It's Phil's. It's okay though. I won't hold it against you. So most people we talk to on this podcast are usually entrepreneurial from birth. Myself excluded. I am not that. I'm a late bloomer when it comes to starting companies. You are not. You've been doing this for a little while. You had a few jobs early in your career, but I'm kind of curious. When did you know you'd be better off doing things on your own? Like what was the point?
That's a great question, and I have a great answer.
Thank you, Greg.
And I remember it very specifically. So I was in Florida working for a very small digital marketing group, and that shrunk, and I got laid off. And I said, great, what am I going to do now? And I ended up going up to New Jersey for a family event. And my father, who has been an entrepreneur all of his life, I very specifically saying, well, what am I going to do? I can't make as much as down in South Florida as I was making up in New York City, which is where in New Jersey. I lived in New Jersey, but commuted into New York City. I was working for AOL at the time. And had I stayed at AOL, I most likely would have, climbed the corporate ladder, but I realized that really wasn't for me. So at this job in Florida, when I was laid off, and then after I spoke with my dad, and he just said, well, why don't you just do what you've been doing, which is building websites and doing SEO and digital marketing. And I said, great, I think I'll maybe give that a shot. And thankfully, my wife will love to hear me say this in public, that thankfully I had a wife who had a job so we could pay the mortgage. And that gave me an opportunity to really start a business from my bedroom. And I started a company called Blue Whale Web Solutions, started to build websites. I started to buy leads from people who needed websites. I did the design, I did the development, I did the coding, I did the sales, you know it. We did everything when we start in our bedroom. And then I slowly... Yeah. And then I slowly got to the point where, all right, I don't need, and I'm not even a designer. I wouldn't call myself a designer. I'm a hack designer. Sure. I got to a point where I could hire a designer to provide me with designs. And I got to a point where I could hire a coder to code, and I could focus on other things. So that's really where my entrepreneurial spark started. And because I offered SEO services and web development services, I started several other lead generation businesses in parallel with that. Some of those I sold as well. Some of them I didn't. And I got to a point in about 2007, 8 when the App Store came out and
Mhm.
pivoted from web design to app development and changed the name of the company to Blue Whale Apps, and was one of the first companies in the App Store developing apps as professional services, just like it did website design, and created a portfolio and started to do some, internal apps that we would make money on. And right place at the right time for app development, and rode that wave for about 8 years ish. And then I sold that company in 2006. No, not 2006. I sold it in 2000. It was 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I can't do the
It's
math right now.
2022 now, Greg. Do you
Yeah,
know,
what year is it?
you know where you are? Okay.
I sold that company, and in 2016 is what I meant to say. So
Right.
2016 is when Amendment 2 happened in Florida, and medical marijuana was starting to pass. And I've been a cannabis consumer almost my entire life, and very passionate about the plant and medical use and what it can do. And so I sold my app development company to really immerse myself for about a year of in learning everything about the industry, going to trade shows, MJ Biz, and getting involved in the movement that was happening in South Florida. And that's how kind of I got my start from, the tech world into cannabis.
I love this. So, because like our stories are insanely parallel, it's a little scary. Um, I'm curious because you kind of started, you alluded to this, but you had a job in Florida. You then, your father encouraged you to kind of uh, do what you do for yourself. That's awesome. My father did the same thing. I'm curious though, because this is early 2000s, right?
That was when I started the company, it was 2004.
Okay, so still fresh off the tech bubble, right?
Yeah.
So one of the, like part of the thing I love to talk about, because I think it's so important for it was important for me to hear these lessons as an entrepreneur, and I think it's really important to contextualize the journey of people in business. So you're right off. This is like, you know, getting into real estate now, or no, getting into real estate in 2008, right? So the tech bubble, the dot-com era of the mid to late 90s, I think it was 1999, it finally crashed essentially.
Hmm.
So like, these humongously valuated companies that had existed that no one listening has ever heard of except for maybe Enron, completely crashed, and overnight they were gone. And this bubble burst. So what this is still I'm imagining this is still fresh in your in
Yeah.
your memory. How is that not? How did you tell? How? What am I trying to say here? How is that not influential on your decision to start your own company? I'm gonna go into an industry where the bubble just burst. You know, how did you defeat that fear in yourself?
Going into the cannabis industry, you mean
No. Going
from?
into tech, out of the tech bubble, right? So going into building websites right after basically the website bubble burst in the late
Mhm.
90s.
Well, it was still, when I started my web company, there was no Squarespace. There was
Yeah,
WordPress, but it was very early.
sure.
There were none of these like WYSIWYG, do it yourself, spin up in a website, go onto
Mhm.
GoDaddy, click a few buttons, and you've got a website. Websites were still very custom, and there were big ad agencies who were charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for a website that today you would be like, oh, you did that on Squarespace or
Yeah.
WordPress, and that looks really good. It's an e-com site, and you can spin that up, or a Shopify site. None of that existed. So, and a lot of these big agencies for web design and for app app development used smaller boutique companies like my company, and then they marked it up 100 times because they didn't have the resources to do that because that really wasn't their core competency. So that was really the opportunity from the web side, and the app. Pivoting from web to app, it just got to be a point where I did the web development for a couple of years, and then the Squarespaces and all that. It started to get a little easier, but then Apple came out with the iPhone and the App
Mhm.
Store, and I was like, wow, this is going to be the next thing. This is where I need to be. I had because I would develop the website and then I would have clients on the hook for monthly SEO services.
Of
So
course.
as I stopped doing web development, but kept the easy income of SEO, because at that point, search engine optimization was all about link building. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was none of that. It was fairly easy to do. So when I pivoted from web to app, I had some of my SEO companies and I got or clients, and I got to the point where I was like, I don't even want this easy money anymore because this isn't where it's at. And I had to tell client, I'm not doing SEO anymore. I'm changing my focus to app development. So I let go a bunch of my SEO clients to really focus on app development. So yeah, does that answer
I
your
love that.
question?
Yeah, no, definitely. Something I'm really hearing here is the pivot, right?
Yeah.
Recognizing an opportunity. At first, it was the inception of coming out of having a 9 to 5 and actually just implementing a bit, starting a business, right? That's one thing. But then recognizing, the launch of the iPhone in 2007 is something that is probably going to have some radical effect on the digital world for sure, but digital
Hmm.
marketing absolutely. Um, I worked at Apple yeah, I started at Apple in 2008. So
Cool.
after that crash, after the music, so at AOL, you were working for AOL Music. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Hmm.
Right. So I was in the music industry. I wasn't on the tech side in the music industry around 2006, 2007. But I was in the music industry on the publishing and performance booking side.
Cool.
So I remember well that what happened then to ancillary industries when the financial crisis of 2008 completely punched the music industry right in the face. That was the first thing that happened. And then so I'm now looking at Apple as, because at this similarly I recognize it as a place that is growing wildly, but also it was the place to be, for sure. I started at
Yeah.
Boylston Street in Boston and then eventually moved to Manhattan and worked at the Cube on Fifth Avenue and then, finally landing in Soho. And one thing that I took from that experience was retail. And I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit because we're pre you getting to Happy Valley, but whatever. It's my podcast. I'll do what I want, Greg. So that retail experience was something that was pounded into me as an employee, right? When we first launched iPad, I remember we spent literally weeks on developing what we then called the unboxing process. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing. Like there wasn't, thousands of unboxing YouTube videos on YouTube at the time. This is a
Hmm.
relatively new thing. So that was a whole experience that they were trying to uh, implement in order to improve the whole customer experience
It's
during the
part of the
release of
brand.
iPad. It's part of the brand. It's just so white glove. And I'm curious because you obviously like recognize something in Apple where you also wanted to pivot into that. But like, what did you see? I mean, beyond the hype, which who's better at it than Apple? Um, what did you see? Like, what just was obvious about that?
As it relates to Happy Valley,
Well,
or
going into the like building, moving from then web to apps.
well, the one thing that comes to my mind, since we're kind of jumping around, is with, at Happy Valley, we have an unboxing experience. Our
Mm-hmm.
products, when you buy an eighth of flour, is in a jar that is induction sealed. That jar is in a box. You open up that box. The box is, I should have grabbed one, but it's matte finish. Your logo's embossed. There is an unboxing experience, and that is absolutely taken from Apple because
Yeah.
I'm an Apple fanatic. I have Apple products. I used to joke with my wife because I ran the app development company. I have to get this new device every year because I have to test on it. So I was always the one with the latest iPhone, even though the one from last year was perfectly fine,
Yep.
because it was part of the business, and that's actually true.
It's an
But
expense.
it's an expense because every device and screen size acts a little bit differently when you're developing apps. But the unboxing experience, Apple, to your point, proved that that's part of the brand, and it gives you a feeling, and you want to associate your brand with good feelings when you interact with that brand because
Mhm.
it's all about the experience. Our tagline in Happy Valley is unlock your experience, whether that's the unboxing experience, that's the obvious experience with the product, or the experience with your host when you're in store, your experience with our content on the website, your experience with our mobile app. That we have. We're one of the only ones with a mobile app in Massachusetts
Mhm.
because of that background that I have. So yeah, that unboxing experience is definitely valid.
I can remember, I mean, so many times iPad launch, new iPhone, like whatever the product was. And this is true for almost every store in a metropolitan area, every Apple store in a metropolitan area. But like I said, I worked at the Fifth Avenue store.
Hmm.
It's for people in New York City, it's might as well be the Statue of Liberty. It's that kind of tourist attraction.
Hmm.
But we'd launch a product, and there would be a queue that would stretch
Yeah.
down Fifth Avenue over to Central Park, and down Central Park, east for blocks and blocks and blocks. And the rationally minded person would say, you want me to unbox an iPad for all of these people? That's insane. But that's what we did because of exactly what you're saying. Like the it's not, people confuse brand. And as a a company, as a graphic designer, I'm not, but as a the founder of a company of graphic designers, um
Right.
one conversation we have constantly is brand versus, what is brand. And 99.9% of companies think the brand is the
His
logo on my
logo.
yeah,
Right.
and it's not. it's
Nope.
it's an it's an ethos, really.
Hmm.
The logo plays into that for sure, but it's an ethos. So when you're looking at a line that stretches for hours down to Central Park, you're damn right we're going to open up all those boxes because what else? That's what we're supposed to do. Like that's the brand.
Hmm.
It's that experience that we're giving to those customers, because they're spending lots of money. And the same with cannabis. It's obviously on a different scale, but maybe you have customers who come in once a week or once a month. They're not coming in every day or every other day or something like that. They're coming in very infrequently because maybe it is an important purchase to them.
Hmm.
Maybe they are weighing it out. You know what I mean? So uh, that
Absolutely.
you're doing that, and this isn't something, having shopped at many dispensaries in Massachusetts, including Happy Valley. Um, it's not you have a unique experience. You're providing a very unique experience. Most dispensaries are super transactional. And
Yeah, and
I
that's what
think
we're
that's
trying. We're
yeah.
trying to avoid the transactional model of come in, get your weed, stand in line, and go. We don't say bud tenders, we say hosts, right? We're trying to elevate this experience, and it is an experience. It's an unboxing experience. It's an educational experience. Were you in our East Boston or
Yeah,
Gloucester store?
East Boston.
East Boston. So you saw our 36-foot screen showing some
Yeah,
content. You saw our touch screens. You saw our
it's awesome.
menus. You saw our gigantic showroom. East Boston is our flagship largest store. We'll have a third store in Brighton in 2023, which is the Old Mary Ann's Bar down in Boston, which a lot of people know and loved.
Oh
So
yeah.
that location is really great. But yeah, we want to create an experience, a place where you feel brand loyal, where you can talk to a host. We've had some hosts that talk with customers for 20, 30 minutes. They're not rushing them out,
Yeah.
and that's not the type of experience it should be. So again, it's unlock your experience, whatever that may be.
Yeah. I mean, not to pull it back to Apple constantly, but I can remember because this was, really for me, that was the first kind of introduction to the idea of an experience versus walking into a store, picking the thing out, paying for it
Right.
and leaving and never thinking about it ever again. Right. The the thing that really blew me away is I can remember being hired at Apple, and in their onboarding literature, they say specifically that their original retail model was based off of what Nordstrom's did and what the W Hotel, I believe the W Hotel, what the W Hotel would do. And I thought that was super interesting, kind of,
Hmm.
why would a technology company look to a hotel and a retail, a clothing retailer to pick and choose what's going to impact the way that they do business. But of course, all you're doing is looking to your peers to figure out what are they doing right, whether it's
Right.
cannabis, iPads, or a jacket, or a hotel room. It's that experience. I'm curious, like, besides Apple, which obviously we've been talking about, but who else are you kind of drawing that inspiration from?
I don't think there's one company in particular. Apple's the easiest reference. A lot of
Sure.
people say that when they come into our store because it's very clean lines. It's whites and grays. There's not like graffiti and pops of color and things
Right.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's the easiest reference. We get that a lot. Wow, your store looks like an Apple store or a jewelry store with the glass showcases and stuff like that, which I love because
Yeah.
there's no, that's a great thing. You want to compare us to the largest, most valued company in the world? Sure, go right ahead.
Give it to me. I'll
But
take
that's
it.
just a look thing. But we hope that our unboxing experience is like Apple's, and all those other things. But we have also the experience in store is very curated. One of the differences between what we're doing compared to all the other dispensaries in Massachusetts, for that matter, is our store is a showcase for our own Happy Valley products. We're vertically integrated.
Right.
We make and grow all of our own flower in Gloucester. We take that flower, we make distillate oil, we make solventless products, we make edibles in our own kitchen, we make our own vape oil with cannabis terpenes that are added back in. We don't use botanical terpenes. So we take great care in the products that we make. And that is the reason why our stores are a showcase for our own product, because we can stand behind them. We know how they're made. We know the quality of the flower. If the quality is not good, we don't use it. So that's how we can control everything from start to finish. So if somebody comes and they have a bad experience with the product, and I say bad experience meaning like maybe there was a cart that leaked or something, we can we
Right.
can make that right. That happens. It's hardware. Hardware breaks. We don't make vape hardware. So, but we can control that because it's our own brand from our own store. So that is a very unique model that is different than a lot. It's real easy, relatively speaking, to open up a retail store and be a 7-Eleven and carry 20
Yeah.
different gummy brands and everybody's flower. And then you're just playing a round robin of who am I buying wholesale from today that's going to give me the best price, that I'm going to sell the best, and how am I going to get people in and out, and what's my bottom line. That's not creating a brand, in my
No.
opinion. We're building a brand. We sell to over 90 different operators across the state. So you can find our Happy Valley products pretty much in every dispensary and growing. So it's a very different model, and it's a ballsy model,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. Yeah, for sure it
Like
is.
it takes a lot of balls to say we're not going to carry anybody else's product and we're going to stand behind our own product. This is the only thing we're going to sell. With a caveat in saying there is one product that we do sell, which is Theory's High Five drink, the seltzer drink. That's just because we don't make seltzers, we don't make drinks,
Totally.
but everything else we make.
it's interesting to hear you say that, and just try to tie it back to, your evolution and where where you started is. So for us right now, we find ourselves, for our clients whose websites we build and whose SEO we manage, who are running retail dispensaries, one of the challenges we are constantly hearing about is, and this is actually from our brands who maybe put their products into retail locations, right? So the education component of it, because like you said, it's, you don't want to be just a shop with, lots. You're controlling that experience as opposed to relying on the customer to figure it out, obviously with the help of bud tenders or associates, whatever. But, you guys are guiding that experience more. So one of the things we've started doing is, because these THC brands are starting to get worried that their sales messaging is now in the hands of associates who aren't trained by them or whatever. So we're building out SEO content that's specifically educational for their consumers. You guys don't really have that problem. It's not like you have to,
right.
And again, bringing it back to the Apple model, 90% of the products in the store were made by Apple. Right. So it was easy to be psyched about them because like we were on the hype train. We knew that new, your guys know, your employees know that that new solventless hash it's coming out this summer or whatever. Like they can get hyped on it and educate themselves because they're
but at Apple, they never told you the date when the new thing is going to come out. They just said, we don't know. Right.
No, they said, hey, guess what? You have an all-nighter next week and we can't tell you why. And we're like, oh, it's an iPhone season.
Right. It's September. Right?
Yeah, exactly. But you don't have to worry about that kind of dilution of not only, knowledge and passion of your employees for the products that Happy Valley makes, but all you're doing is selling Happy Valley. Like that education and passion, that love is like I said, curated and really managed.
It's a great point because, again, taking to the iPhone, you'll get trained how to use the new OS, right? That's the product, right? In cannabis, our host, because we only sell Happy Valley products, and the majority of the people who work there are consumers, when you go up and you ask the host, hey, I need, I want something for sleep, something more indica leaning, something high in limonene for terpenes. That's what I know that I like. And the host you're talking about it, there's a much better chance that that host or someone in the building, if it's not that person, has tried one or many or all of those different cultivars and can give you a real recommendation. It's not just, hey, this is the brand we're pushing this week, but we also have 5 other brands and 5 other, different product choices. So to your point, they're more highly educated, like Apple, on the products, and they also try those products so they can really speak from the heart as to the effects and how they made them feel. But the thing with cannabis, as we all know, what may work for me and how I feel may not work exactly for you. And that, that's an educational, I'm not going to say problem, but like that's an educational solution that as an industry, we need to solve. It's not going to be easy, but it's not just like, hey, there's indica, sativa, and hybrid, and this is going to put you to sleep, and this is going to wake you up and be creative. Everything's hybrid, and it's really based around terpenes, and that is really where the education comes into play. We're in a market right now in Massachusetts that's like, I just want the highest TAC. What's your highest? You got 29, 32% THC? I'll take 5. Right. And but there is a market for, not necessarily in Massachusetts yet, but in markets, more mature markets like Colorado and California, where it's like, you know what? I want a 2-to-1, right? I want something under 20% because I have to get on a call and, whatever the case may be. So it's not all about high THC, but in this market, because it's the first adult use market on the East Coast, that is really what moves the needle.
Okay. And this is another great example of one of those hugely abstract things that most business owners don't know is part of brand, is listening to your customers, right? The easy route is to build products that are fire. They get the highest THC. It's, you know,
Right.
whatever. It's it's so solventless. It's the most like whatever, right? I want more, but there is a whole demographic. And I would probably say it's a majority of cannabis consumers who aren't into that at all. Right. And part of building a brand is recognizing, and okay, so we put out creative surveys, right? We put out a website. We book a new creative client or a new web client, and we give them a creative survey. Tell us about yourself. What is your brand? Who is your customer? Right. 50% of the time, who is your customer? What do you think they say, Greg?
The 420 guy.
No, they say everybody's my customer.
Oh,
They
everybody.
always
Okay.
say, who's your customer? Everybody. No, everybody's not your customer. Everybody's not
Right.
your customer, right? So you have companies who will focus on, uh, uh, building a line of products to cater to the uber heady consumer base. But meanwhile, you have smart brands who are listening to the quieter voices, the baby boomers who are coming in and saying, I just don't, I'm not trying to get stoned. I just want to go to sleep. Like I'm
Right.
trying to get this hip like feeling right again. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
There is
Mm-hmm.
that whole community of consumer that wants something specific. And it's important for companies like Happy Valley to recognize that and be like, that's my customer, or that is one of my customer personas.
That's all about the product fit for that specific customer, which is why it's so important for your host or your bud tender to spend the time and find out with that customer that they so much appreciate, especially if they're new or they're
Yeah.
returning to cannabis or they're a baby boomer with the hip replacement and they want to get off a Percocet, but they don't want to smoke because they had lung cancer.
Yeah.
So we would recommend a tincture. We have a 1-to-1 with CBD and THC. We'd have just a straight up THC tincture, and that will help you with your pain, right? So it's really about understanding, not unlike any other business or any other retail store, understanding what your customer wants and trying to match the right product or consumption method.
Yeah. I feel like that's almost in most instances, the first thing that business owners need to figure out is like, who am I making this for? Because it's definitely not for everybody. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be. It's impractical. But if you can do it really well for a certain subset of consumer, your business will
Yeah.
ultimately become successful. I want to take a few steps back because we skipped over a couple things that I think are really interesting, and because we're mostly an entrepreneurial focused podcast, I think are
Hmm.
important to touch upon. So let's go back in the future again, just for a
Okay.
minute, because one thing that I'm fascinated by is the exit strategy. It's something that I think about constantly. I'm the founder of a
Hmm.
company in a pretty hot space. It's not out of the realm of possibility that somebody may be interested in my company one day. So
Hmm.
I think about that. I would say it's one of the things entrepreneurs think about most when you're trying to get investment from people. They'll often ask you, what's your exit strategy? What was your exit strategy? Let's talk about that. When you were ready to get rid
Yeah.
of your
So
companies, I'm
so
curious.
re
I'm curious about all this.
so rewinding. And I'm not going to try and do the math in my head what year it was.
No. Just know
Um,
that we're 2022 now. That's all you got to
yeah,
think about.
but basically when I started, and this is a great story that I haven't told in a long time. So when I started the web company and doing SEO, and I got my feet and my legs, and it was starting to have some success and being able to pay some bills and thinking, hey, this is what I want to do. I'm not going to have to go back to a day job, and I'm not ever going to do that. I had one client that I built a website for, and hopefully he's not going to find this podcast and ever hear it. This was a very long time ago, and this was when, again, search engine
I
optimization was
guarantee you,
easy.
Greg, he won't.
When search engine optimization was easy, and you could spend 60 days getting backlinks and buying backlinks and creating a subdomain and keyword stuffing your homepage and be at the top of Google, right? So I built a website and did SEO for him. His mother was in the title insurance business and real estate. And his website was called freetitlequote.com. And the
We'll
concept
link it in
was,
the description.
yeah, please don't.
We'll get that
So,
backlink.
yeah. So basically, I built him this website where he got all these leads, and I did SEO, and I started seeing and I built this in this admin. It's like, wow, this guy's killing it. He would take one lead and he would send it out to 5 title companies, and he would get paid on every lead. And one title company would win, and they'd get the gig, right? It was like, remember Service Magic back
Yeah,
in the
sure.
day,
Yeah, yeah, of
for
course.
like contractors. It was like that
Yeah.
kind of model, lead gen. And so I built him this website. I saw these leads he was getting, and I knew from it, I knew what he was selling the leads for. And I'm doing some calculations, like, this guy's freaking killing it. And he was like very young. He wasn't even like 20 or 18. He was like very young, very entrepreneurial.
Hmm.
And I think his mother may have funded the whole project. But anyway, that was like, it was one of those moments where I was like, well, if he can do it, I can do it. And I freaking built the thing, right?
Hmm.
So I had just moved to Florida from New Jersey. I had been in Florida for a couple of years. I built I bought a new construction home in like a gated community, and had my son was very little at the time, and I was the only guy on my block without a pool in a very zero lot line. Like, the pool I would have had would have been so small anyway.
A
So I'm
bathtub.
like, yeah, I'm like, well, how could I take this title quote, lead gen idea, and do something? So long story short, I created this website called freepoolquotes.com, where you would get 5 uh, vetted quotes from pool contractors. And I created orlando.freepoolquotes.com and miami.freepoolquotes.com and Tampa and all the Florida cities. And in the evening, when I wasn't doing the web design stuff, I would do sales calls, and I would email these contractors to get them to join the network. And basically, I followed the same model, where I would send out the leads, and I was doing everything on paper. I sent this lead out to this pool contractor, just writing everything down and doing it in Outlook and forwarding and BCCing the leads, because I didn't have any admin or automated process to do it. And I was starting to kill it because SEO was so easy, and I had the backlink resources, and I was sending out these leads at night, and I was doing the web development during the day. So to answer your question, about a year and a half into it, I get a call or an email, whatever it was, from a company who buys and sells websites. And he said, would you be interested in selling your website? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? I never really thought about it. Thought about the exit strategy.
Sure.
That was the first time I thought about the exit strategy. So again, long story short, he was like, no obligation, just send me your last 12 months trailing revenue, send me your expenses. I wasn't even on QuickBooks at the time. This was just a side hustle, because I had the resources to build the website and the resources to do the SEO. And in a year and a half, the thing exploded. So again, long story short, listed the website with the guy he was like the lead gen guy. He probably had a task: go find me every lead gen in every vertical, and let's see if we can, make a deal,
Find some
because they had
gold.
a bucket of people who were interested in lead gen. There was a big company called Quinn Street. If I don't even know if they're still around, but they're like a lead gen aggregator. They helped with Service Magic and those types of websites.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, we ended up listing it and sold the site for $200,000 18 months from the time that I started it. And then I was like, that's a pretty good model. That's my exit strategy. So I had gone through that. So the next site that I was like, all right, well, I think I can rinse and repeat this. And this is before apps.
Hmm.
So then I did easykitchenquotes.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I bring up Quinn Street because I ended up selling the leads to Quinn Street rather than trying to create my own network and all that sales and legwork. And they rejected about half of them because they scrubbed for fake ones and stuff like that. But I ended up selling that website as well without a broker because I had gone through the motions and I knew how to do it. So then about that time was when the app thing started to happen and the iPhone came out. So I was like, well, how am I going to generate leads to develop apps? Because the App Store just started. And I was like, all right, well, let me throw together this website, a landing page with a landing page and a thank you page. And I called it iPhoneAppQuotes.com and get 3 or 5, I think it was five quotes from vetted US based app developers, Blue Owl Apps being one. And I didn't have a network. I just threw it up. Literally in a couple weeks since the website was up. Do you remember Gizmodo? I don't even know if they're still around.
Of course, they are still around.
I did a press release through PR Web. This is probably the best PR Web success story that PR Web doesn't even know about. I spent $100 on a press release, and I really only did it for SEO, right? Because that was when PR Web allowed you to put backlinks, right?
Yeah.
And that was like one of the SEO strategies back then. So I did a press release. Hey, this new website, get free quotes. Da 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 da. Gizmodo picked up the press release, put it on their homepage, an article about it with a link for like 2 weeks. And I remember this specifically because the Gizmodo thing came out on a Friday or a Thursday. And I woke up Friday morning. I was about to go to the Bahamas for vacation. And in my Outlook, in my email, was like 300 leads.
Damn.
And I was like, holy shit, where the hell, what happened? I go to Google Analytics and what do I see? A giant spike and referring Gizmodo. I went to the page, and then Gizmodo UK picked it up, and Gizmodo, Australia picked it up, and then like these bloggers picked it up, and the shit just went crazy. So I literally remember printing out every single one of those leads before I left on vacation in a giant folder. And for like 2 days, my wife killed me. That's what I did on my vacation. I sorted out these leads. Some of them were app developers that were just getting started. How do I join your network? Some of them, I got leads from Foot Locker, from Sears, from when Sears was still around, from like really big companies. I got a lead it was a pharmaceutical company, I can't remember, but I was just like, holy shit. And so that was when I knew I had something, so that's how I got to build the portfolio of the app development company. But when I started it, I had my exit strategy in mind. I knew that
because you had just been through with the pool quote company.
Right. And I knew I didn't want to be.
But you were presumably you now had, this is the thing that like always, it's so confusing, right? When people talk about the valuating their company or what the value of their company is, part of it is like a mysterious, nebulous chunk of value that is fairly arbitrary. Here's like my revenue, but here's what this brand is worth, kind of, right? And but the more juice you have. So you had a lot of backlinks, you had like all these people talking about it, and
rankings. There's value in rankings.
Exactly.
I'll put a value on a number one ranking based on how much traffic Google says it gets, and you'll put a value on it that'll be different, right?
Oh yeah.
But there's revenue. There's your trailing revenue, and you sell for a multiple of that revenue typically. And then there's what you're talking about, those kind of like intangibles, like what is a number one ranking worth for swimming pool contract or Orlando, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the other things
like who knows?
Well, it's value
important. It's super important to figure out. Like it's super important part of like adding an actual number to the value of your company.
Yeah, and that directly translates to leads in, which is money. So they're all interconnected. But what you're talking about is like over for Happy Valley, talking about like what's the brand worth? Like, just the brand we don't know, but if you could say my brand, I have such great brand awareness, or you do a focus group and you put the key in front of them, people go, 9 out of 10 people know what it is. And then there's value there. It's like
Yeah.
the Apple logo or the Nike swoosh or whatever. But so that was how I really figured out, like, I needed to have an exit strategy when I started. So same kind of thing. I didn't use a broker. I knew it got to the point with iPhone app quotes where I was spending so much time vetting leads. And at this time I got smarter. I ended up building a system where on the back end it matched and automatically went out. So I wasn't writing on paper. It was like, here's what I want. Here's what I think my budget range is. But what was different about it in the lead gen is that either me or I ended up hiring someone, we actually called the person. So I would call you and be like, you really think you want to build Twitter for $5,000? It's always, Twitter meets
Yeah.
Facebook meets this or
Sure.
whatever. And people have never built apps before. It was very new.
Right.
Even for the bigger companies, they have no idea what it costs to build. So usually their budget ranges were out of whack with what it would really. So the service that we provide, in addition to just the contact of the lead gen, was this vetting process. And so, like, you really need more than $5,000 to build Twitter. If you have, $500,000, maybe you could. So we didn't even,
Right.
about half the leads we got in, we vetted, we just
They weren't
trashed.
qualified.
They weren't qualified. So the developers and development companies really appreciated that, because they were buying leads from other places too. But because we really vetted them, because of my background building apps, I knew the questions to ask. And then I trained other people who answered the phones and did what I did. They just weren't bodies answering a phone going through a set of questions.
Right. Totally. So your exit strategy is in place. So here's, this is so interesting to me. I love that you're like, I see what they're doing. So I see what they're doing. I can do this. I'm probably equipped to do this better. Let's see if I'm right. And that's like, that's the jump that it takes to, like, I love that. I love that story. When so you sold your companies, and you kind of touched upon why cannabis. I mean, and it's, not necessarily a unique story. I love cannabis. Same with me. But I'm curious, like, what was that time between kind of like closing shop with your ventures, and then maybe going back into being an employee?
Yes. So I sold Blue Whale apps. And then I took, like I said, about a year, a little more if you ask my wife, but I say a year, in terms of just immersing myself in the industry and going to trade shows and learning what terpenes are, and getting involved in United for Care that was happening in Florida, which was the company headed by John Morgan, who got all the signatures and eventually got medical passed in Florida. And before I moved to Colorado, I was like, well, what could I do? And I realized, and this was before medical marijuana was passed in Florida, I started a company called Canna Holdings, which put on medical symposiums for physicians. And through that year of networking, I got introduced to this person, introduced me to this person, and I did a test at it was the Hilton in West Palm Beach, right by the airport. There was maybe about 100 people. It was a free event. I had never put on an event before in my life, other than participating in my wedding. And,
Sure.
And I had 4 speakers who were all medical cannabis professionals. And one guy spoke about the endocannabinoid system. Another guy spoke about brain disorders. And we kind of mapped it to all of the debilitating conditions that were in the amendment, and promoted it to free. It's free for physicians. Come learn about medical marijuana, because if this thing passes, and it looks like it's going to, because it's the second time around, people are going to come in with these conditions and ask you, doc, I've got Crohn's disease. This just passed. Why should I use this? and you're going to look like an idiot, doc, if you have no answer, because this is happening. Regardless of what your political views are, it's your job to understand and know, because this is happening. So I did that first event. It was a really great success. I broke even. I didn't lose money. And then about 6 months later, I did an even bigger event in Fort Lauderdale where I had 10 speakers. I had lunch. I blew it out. I had 2 giant screens. I moderated it. I sold tickets. I partnered with a company so these docs would get CE, continuing education credits, for attending. And that was really great. And then I did a third one in Orlando. And then I said, well, I don't really want to be in the event business. My whole
A lot of
point of
work.
doing this is because I wanted to apply for a license in Florida. I wanted to get a license. I wanted to open my own dispensary or be in a grow or whatever it was. Without getting too in the weeds in Florida legislature and politics, Florida is the most difficult state to get a license. It's mandated vertical integration. You have to partner with a nursery who's been in business for 30 years and grown several hundred thousands of plants, which boxed the majority of the people out who wanted to apply for a license. Unlike Massachusetts, for example, who has a social equity program, not vertically integrated. You could open up a retail store with, I don't say little capital, but not as much as building a grow and stuff like that. So in Florida, so I did that company, and then I got involved in another company called Leaf, and that's what brought me to Boulder, to a legal market. And Leaf is a hydroponic grow box that's controlled by an app for home growing.
Oh, cool.
They still haven't shipped the product. They've run into many, many issues in funding in China and stuff like that. And that was like, that was 4 years ago, because I've been with Happy Valley for 4 years. So it was more than 4 years ago. But that's what brought me to Boulder. And then that company needed to raise money. And then I was introduced to the CEO at Happy Valley. And then I ended up commuting back and forth from Boulder to Massachusetts for the better part of 2 years, once or twice a month, until the stores were open. And then that's what brought me to move.
That's amazing. So one thing that I really relate to there, and you, I would say, took it to the extreme level. I would be the participant of one of your events, not the person putting on those events, but probably with the same intent of, it's important for me to be exposed to people in this industry, whether it be medical professionals or whatever it is. Like, who are my peers? Because up until like last year, cannabis was in the shadows. You know what I mean? Like, this thing was a huge secret for everybody up until very recently. So like, how do I get out and meet my peers and know who my, colleagues are going to be in the future? Like, who's doing what? So I did that same thing. It was just, and it's for me, it was a bit about, and this is kind of a topic that's touched upon almost in every single episode of the show, which is stepping outside of your comfort zone, doing something that's maybe uncomfortable so that you can become an evolved human, right? Like you're
I mean, I hate public
places.
speaking. I hate public speaking.
Yeah.
And it came to the time where it was like, not for the first event, but for the second and the third events that got bigger, and I had 2 screens and there was a PA and there was hundreds of people. I was like, well, who's going to moderate this event? And who's going to introduce all the speakers that I convinced?
Who's better equipped to do it?
I guess it's got to be me, and I got to suck it up.
Yeah.
But
I've been in that situation too, where they're like, hey, here's the mic. And I'm like, what? Basically. But those moments are I mean, it sounds so cliche to say, but those moments are really the ones that, alter your trajectory as a person on this planet. You were either going to be scared and not do it, or you were going to do it. And, now you can do it. All of a sudden, you're a public speaker.
I learned so much from doing those events, and even just from, there was always Q&A in the audience, and you had a lot of pain management doctors who were like, very adverse. And I remember one specifically, I can't remember his name, but I can see his face. He came up to me after the show, and during the show, he asked a question. It was very confrontational to one of the speakers. And afterwards, he came and he sought me out and he said, "Greg, I'm so happy you put this on. I came in thinking one way, and I'm now thinking a different way.
Wow.
And I'm going to go get my my certification. There's like a an online test that they have to get to be certified to be able to
Yeah.
write for, because it's not a prescription, a
Right.
recommendation to go get medical marijuana in Florida. He's like, I'm gonna take the test. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna learn more. I was curious, but I wasn't sure. Thank you for putting on the show." And I was like, wow.
That's
And that
marketing right
one
there. That's
pain
marketing right
doctor,
there.
think about the amount of people, humans, that pain doctor touches to say, you don't really need to be on opioids right now. It's your choice, but there are other options. And coming from a doctor saying that to a patient is different than me telling you, right?
Sure.
Because of where they are in the hierarchy of our social ladder
trust
here,
tree.
you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that in itself, I would say that was probably one of the most fulfilling things that I've done, just to know that one doctor touches so many. And those 3 events that I did, and there were hundreds of doctors, physicians in the audience, and they all touch and speak to hundreds of patients. So that was really great.
So to me, like, the entrepreneurial equivalent of that is validation. It's,
Yeah.
and I only speak from experience, but I think it is a relatable thing because people have told me that it is. But that idea of, starting a company, maybe doing it in secret. I mean, I kind of did for a little while. Starting a cannabis company is maybe weird, but it's not. That, in the back of your, that's the fear telling you that it's weird, but in the back of your brain, you know exactly what you're doing, and you know that there is no other choice. You're
Mm-hmm.
maybe driven to do it. And then the second you get that outside validation, it's literally, for me, it was like a light switch. It was just like, oh God,
Yeah.
And it didn't come from someone in it wasn't like my mom being like, oh, you're so cute,
Right.
like it was, like you, someone who mattered, someone whose opinion mattered, who wasn't going to placate me,
Right.
it's such an
Yeah.
important thing, because then you're like, okay, I actually do know it now, because then that fear voice that was like, maybe I should be quiet about this, goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it went away for lots of things, like that voice of, yeah, the voice, everybody's got it. It's the voice that tell you can't, or you shouldn't, or this is what people are going to think of you when you do that thing, that you don't wear that, wear this, whatever. Like, the second you take a leap off the cliff, and the second someone's like, nice jump, you're like, I got this. It doesn't even matter.
Yeah, you just have to jump in. You just have to do it. If you fail, you'll learn from it. You'll do it differently. You just have to do it. The worst thing to me in terms of people who aspire to be an entrepreneur, do their own thing, or run their own business, is to not try, and to not, for whatever excuse you could dream up or make. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have the right resources. I'm not educated enough. Like, there's so many obstacles that you can put in front of you as reason not to do it.
Yep.
So, I've had, businesses that have failed, that I've spent lots of time and lots of money on, that didn't go anywhere, but I've learned from them. And I
Yeah.
won't make that partner mistake again. I won't
Yep.
make that product mistake again. I won't make that phone call again. I won't
Yep.
write that email again. And those lessons have served me well now.
Absolutely. The failures are usually more important than successes. I mean, that first win of your professional career, again, it's whether it's closing a contract, or some doctor telling you that his mind has been changed.
Yeah.
That first win is definitely, it tastes the best, but then they start happening, and for me at least, I'm grateful for everyone, but the failures are the ones that stick with you. Like, those are the ones that really stick with you. So I love that, man. I love that you're, being self-aware is a hugely important personality trait for people who want to be successful at anything they do.
Yeah.
What was it about Happy Valley? Like, you're in Boulder, literally on the other side of the country. What was going on in Massachusetts? What was Happy Valley doing that you were so stoked on?
Well, I will say that I've never in my lifetime envisioned I'd live in New England or the North Shore of Massachusetts. And in fact,
You
I may have
love Dunkin'
even
Donuts now, don't you?
only been to Boston once. I do not like Dunkin' Donuts. I'm a Starbucks person.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Don't say
I don't know
that.
what the
No, we won't tell. We won't.
I don't know
We'll
what the
edit that part
obsession
out.
with dunks is. Yeah. No, I'll own that gracefully. So I was introduced to Michael Riordan, who's our CEO, through a mutual friend, who was a friend just by me submitting a contact form on his website. So when I was in Florida, immersing myself in the industry, and you may have know this gentleman. He runs a podcast called Canna Insider.
Sure.
His
Yeah.
name's Matt.
Yeah.
So when Matt was first getting started, and he's like the OG Canna podcaster,
Yeah.
right? He's been around for a long time. And I was like, wow. And he only had like a couple episodes. And I was like, let me reach out to this guy. He would actually be a really good guy if you want to have on your podcast.
I should. Mental note.
Yeah, and I'll make an introduction if you need to.
Thank you. Yeah, that'd be great.
So the
power of networking, people. This is networking right here. It's happening live and in real time.
That's exactly the purpose of the story. So filled out his website contact form. He emailed me back and was like, hey, we ended up talking. I told him what I was doing with the symposiums in Florida and the industry and what I wanted to do. He was living in Boulder at the time. And this was, I think, before I was even involved in Leaf or even had an inkling of moving to Boulder. But we became friends, and I flew out to Boulder to meet him and to also meet two other people who he had become good friends with, Jay and Diane Zarkowski, who run Canna Advisors in Boulder, who was one of the first OG Canna consulting firms, and they've won many, many licenses across every state. And so he introduced me to them because I was trying to apply for a license in Florida. So I actually engaged with them in a consulting to help write a business plan and financials, because that was the trajectory I was doing. And the symposiums was just going to be a differentiator on my application, because I've already educated all these doctors, and what has everybody else done, right? So that was how I got introduced to Matt, and through Jay and Diane became really good friends with. So I'm sorry, I forget where I was going with this.
Why Happy Valley? How Happy Valley?
Oh, right. So Matt, who prior to Boulder lived in South Carolina, Matt, who runs Canna Insider, was friends with Michael, our CEO at Happy Valley. And Michael and him were talking and said, hey, I need someone to run technology, etc. Matt introduced us. I ended up from Boulder consulting for a couple of months and flying out here. And, Michael showed me this giant plot of land that had just had a steel frame at this point and said, this is our cultivation facility. And it was just a frame. And I was just in awe. And it was basically, he was 2 years ahead of me where I wanted to be in Florida, right? He had already gotten a provisional licenses. He was well funded. His background was real estate and development. And his family business was construction and real estate developments and mortgages. He came from the mortgage industry, so he knew that whole world. I didn't know any of that. And then I was like, what the hell was I thinking that I could run a vertically integrated company? So, or even start to build one.
So much to do.
Oh my God. So I flew out and then started consulting for a little while, and then Leaf, the company that I told you about, they ran into some money problems, and he offered me a full-time position to be able to commute as needed back to Massachusetts, knowing that the stores would be open in a year and a half, 2 years, and there was so much to do. And so that's what drew me. I mean, it's basically I was the second person hired here, almost 4 years ago, and there's 200 plus people in the company with 2 stores open now, full on manufacturing cultivation facility. We have another 80,000 square foot facility in Newburyport that is cultivation and breeding that will be open in probably about a year and a half,
So exciting.
to supply the wholesale market. So like I saw like what I had envisioned. It wasn't mine per se, but it was the opportunity to get in at a ground floor and really make an impact on the direction of the company.
Yeah.
And so that's where I've been. And then I made a decision to move my whole family out in the middle of a pandemic because I really believed in the company and the brand and what we were building and how we were being different than everybody else, which really I was and still am drawn to. Like, we're leaders. Like, you guys
Yeah.
follow us. Like, no one else in Massachusetts is doing their own, showcase type of store model. And it's proven to be different and it's proven to be successful. So that's what
I
drew
can
me
totally relate
to
to that.
Massachusetts.
I can completely relate to that. Like, seeing an opportunity, and not only seeing an opportunity, like the thing about cannabis is timing. Like, there's
Yes.
plenty of opportunities, but find me a point in recent history where we're, except for maybe technology, where we're, introduced to such a fast moving, uh, crazy industry, just everything,
Hmm.
a, I don't know if you hear about cannabis years, 1 year is like 7 years in cannabis years,
Yeah,
it's
it's
like a
true.
dog year. But it is fast moving, and being able to recognize that opportunity and being in a time and place, like, man, I totally relate to that for sure. Like, I sometimes look around and I'm like, I'm on a wave. I know that I'm on this.
Yeah.
I'm not paddling and I didn't miss it. I'm on it. It's happening. I'm surfing this wave.
I mean, you really hit the nail on the head because a lot of this industry, and I think more so than other industries because it's so new and we're learning and things change. The networking and meeting people, I can tell you so many people that I've met through intros of other people that have led to jobs or sales or new vendors or whatever the case may be. And going to like, this last year was I think my maybe 7th year of going to MJ Biz,
Yep.
in Vegas. It's
Yeah.
like
It was a great
my
one.
pilgrimage, and just bumping into people that you've seen. Last year there was like 30,000 people, but when it was at the Rio and there was 5,000 people, and it
Right.
was much smaller. So more so I think than any other industry, networking and intros and being present at these types of events is important because those intros and those meetings can pay dividends for sure.
They happen. It happens at all of the networking events, whether, I was almost late to this podcast because I was running, luckily it was downtown and only a couple blocks away, but I was running back and forth between it's just a small networking event. And I was okay. If I was going to be late to this podcast, I wasn't, but if I was going to be, I would have
Yeah.
I would have justified it because the networking is the most important thing. And I hope that's it. I always hope that people take that away when they because it is not a unique story. Like, getting out there and meeting people who are doing the thing that you hope to be doing, or at least are in the industry that you hope to be in, will get you in that industry or will get you doing that thing. Um,
And let me
for sure.
clarify because when we say networking, I'm not talking about go join your local BMI chapter and go there every week at the coffee shop at 7 a.m. and
No,
hand out referrals because
go
you
to
need
BizCon.
to. Right. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about finding someone interesting like Matt from Canna Insider, going to their contact page and writing an email and see if they'll reach out to you. I get
Exactly.
people that email me all the time.
Totally.
Um, I can tell the difference between someone that wants to sell me something and someone who's really genuine and honest and just like, hey, I just I hate when people say pick your brain, but like,
Yeah.
and if I have time and, I'll give somebody a half hour of my time because I know it's going to come back to me and that may lead to something else. And it very well has.
Totally. And for me, I feel obligated to do it because I'm still that guy. I still say things like, I'd like to pick your brain. And, you know, it's
Yeah,
important
don't say
still.
that.
Like,
Don't
yeah,
say
I
that.
won't. I won't. Okay. That's the last time, folks. I'll never say that ever again. I can't even think of like a whatever. I'd like to steal your ideas from your brain.
Right.
But it is important because you only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. And the
Yeah.
second you have a conversation with a person who's got not even more or less experience, just differently experienced, is, your perspective shifts ultimately. Um,
Yep.
Greg, we kind of talked about kind of what you guys have on deck for Happy Valley. That's usually how I close it. What's in deck for you in the next couple of years? But you talked about it. You guys are expanding like crazy. Um, uh, I love hearing it. I love seeing the growth happening in this industry. I love watching people who are, and I'm sorry, I got to use another stupid term, but people trailblazers in this industry, actually becoming successful and actually making an impact on this. So I won't ask you what's up for the next couple of years because you've already told us. And I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to tell us your story. It's been a wonderful pleasure talking to you, Greg.
Yeah, no problem. It's been fun.
Well, get back to it, man. You got to go like update, iOS 16 is about to come out. So you got to go update all your iPads on the floor. You got to make sure, you got to get it done. Gregg Weiss, VP of Technology at Happy Valley. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. This has been Common SENSimilla. I'm your host, Will Reed. We will see you next time. Peace out.
Thanks, Will.